Welcome to Republican Roundtable. As 2020 heats up, all eyes are on congressional races to support the president. One in particular in Minnesota has caught the eye nationally, and that is a district out west, and I mean way west in Minnesota, and that is Congressional District 7. Today we have in with us one of the Republican candidates for Congressional District 7, Dave Hughes. Dave, thanks for joining the Republican Roundtable today.
Hi, Max. Thanks for having me here.
So Congressional District 7, for the listeners and the viewers who don't necessarily know where that is, describe to us the district and the physical geography of it.
Minnesota's 7th Congressional District is basically the entire western half of the state. A lot of the journalists talk about it being the northwest part of it, but it is the entire western half except for a sliver of counties on the southern border with Iowa. And it's such a huge district. It's 38 counties and the size of the state of South Carolina.
Fascinating. And the district itself, one thing that's very interesting, in 2016, Trump won the district by what, 30 points?
31 points.
31 points. And yet we have a sitting Democratic representative, Collin Peterson, who has been there for 30 years. How do you explain that dichotomy in that district, Dave?
Well, a couple of things. One, two of the issues that are very important to people in western Minnesota are the life issue and our gun rights. And Collin Peterson has a pretty good voting record, and it's been pretty consistent over his career. And so I think that's one of the big reasons. But the other big reason is agriculture is 25% of the economy in western Minnesota, and it's the #1 economic sector. And Collin has been part of that his whole career. And notably, he's been chairman of the House Agriculture Committee for much of that time. And so there's this perception that he's vital to things in western Minnesota. And I think that's something that we can overcome, but those are some of the reasons why he's been there so long.
Let's talk about your background specifically. You're almost as integrated with this district, I feel like, as Collin Peterson is, having run for it before. Dave, what's kind of your personal background? What's your professional background? What makes you qualified to run for Congress in that seat?
Well, I served on active duty for almost 22 years in the U.S. Air Force. I was an officer, a pilot, and an Iraq war vet. And that whole time that I was on active duty, I thought about national policy. And I observed what was going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. And when it came time to retire to western Minnesota, because my wife is from there, it was apparent that it was time to run for Congress and to help the people of western Minnesota have a conservative in Washington, D.C. And so that's my background. I flew the MQ-9 Reaper drone with the same Hellfire missile that was used recently on General Qasem Soleimani. And so I have some insight into our capabilities there that I think might be helpful to the president.
Now, you mentioned some of the things that Collin Peterson plays off of that are important to the people in Congressional District 7. What are some things he's bad on? Is it just the fact that he's part of the caucus that you're trying to hit him on, or are there specific things about Collin Peterson where he's no longer a good fit for that district?
Well, he's not a good fit in the sense that he has voted 75% to 85% against President Trump's initiatives. So there's groups out there that track his actual every single vote that he does, and boom, 85% anti-Trump vote. So that's notable. The other thing is really the American Farm Bureau Federation and other farm groups. They have very specific policy desires that are expressed on their websites. And Collin Peterson has voted against those. He's expressed publicly that he's against those. And certainly his caucus is against those. I mean, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. The American Farm Bureau Federation wants to abolish outright both the capital gains tax and the estate tax. And certainly, I don't imagine that the Democrats would ever go for abolishing the capital gains tax, because that plays into the whole class warfare narrative that they are engaged in.
Right. And then obviously with the estate tax, farmers are some of the biggest beneficiaries of having a low estate tax. It's what they kind of rely on to pass their assets on to their children, right?
Right. Well, and one of the other things that I think your viewers might be interested in is the issues about which he's perceived as being good, that I've already mentioned, the life issue and the Second Amendment issue. In reality, he's actually not that good. I'm in the process of digging into his records of what he has been doing with his campaign funds over the last 30 years. And none of it is illegal, none of it violates any House ethics rules. But for 30 years, he's been giving money to fellow Democratic candidates who are wildly pro-abortion and wildly against your Second Amendment rights. The most recent example that's in the public record is Margaret Anderson Kelleher, who ran against Ilhan Omar in 2018. Collin Peterson gave her $2,000. She's now Governor Walz's commissioner for the Department of Transportation. and she has a 100% NARAL rating.
Right.
So if Congressman Peterson is pro-life, why is he giving money to candidates who have the opposite view? And I think that the media and the politicians and the party structures haven't gotten that word out properly, and so that's part of what my campaign is doing right now.
I think for the first time, it seems to me this is a concerted focus on CD7 as a low-hanging fruit. National groups are actually like looking in and focusing on this race, Dave. What about it this time has made them pay attention when this district has been pretty much the same for the last, couple cycles, especially stemming from 2016? It seemed like we had a huge opportunity back then. Why now is this a focus for national groups, federal groups? The entire country has their eyes basically on CD7. Why now?
I think it's probably the result of 16. The president won it by such a wide margin. I mean, my knowledge of the district politically goes back to about 2010. They had a decent candidate in 10 and 12. Same person ran simultaneous. Then you had Senator Westrom who ran in 14. And the NRCC was very invested in that campaign in 14. Mm-hmm. When I ran in 16 and 18, they decided not to be involved. But I think your viewers may not know this. When I ran in 16 and 18, both those times, I did better than any candidate 22 years before me. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the press, Politico, and some of these other national press folks talk about how CD7 hasn't had a real candidate since 2014, mm-hmm. but I did better than that candidate. And the fact that we did so well in 16 and 18 and even did better in 18 during the National Blue Wave, I think that now they're saying that trend combined with the president's performance in 16 means that 20 is a pickup year. So I think that's why. So
let's talk about your candidacy then specifically, because you have run for the seat 4 times, correct?
No, twice.
Twice. Mm-hmm. Twice. Yeah, and so this will be your third run
yes.
at this seat. What specifically about your campaign, Dave? Are you doing anything different? Are you trying to rely on maybe a potential wave? What does that look like for you?
Well, a couple of different things. One, in 16, it was really just my wife and I. We didn't have much of a team, and
sure.
and that's a quaint story.
She's a wonderful woman, by the way.
She is. She is my secret weapon, so to speak. But it was just us, and we didn't know messaging. In 18, we had a team, and we did a good job, but we learned a lot. And in this year for 2020, I've got an all-new team with a lot of experience and strong connections to the Trump campaign. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be strategic messaging there, targeted messaging that we didn't do in the previous 2. So there's all sorts of opportunity here that we just didn't engage in 16 and 18. Okay. That combined with it being a presidential year and the fact that the president endorsed me in 18, and we're striving to and working hard to get him to endorse me in 20. And if he endorses me in 20 and physically shows up in the district, that combined with the strength of all our effort these last 4 years, I think that would make it much different than the previous 2 attempts.
We talked about some issues that the voters in CD7 care about, and I think one of the interesting dichotomies of CD7 is the effect of some of these Trump tariffs and the effect that it has on farmers. What are you getting a sense for that issue on the ground, Dave? Do you find that people are willing to kind of hold out and wait and see, or are you getting some kind of other vibe from the folks in CD7?
No, I'm getting the same response that you've seen nationally, and it's kind of surprising because when I ran last time in 18, I asked all the farmers that I could talk to in western Minnesota, I said, how long can you hold out? I mean, first of all, they were all with the president. They said, we know what he's doing. He's putting pressure on China, which is a murderous communist nation. Not the people of China. I adopted a daughter from China, but the government of China is terrible. The president recognizes that, and he's applying pressure to them for a variety of strategic reasons. Meanwhile, he's opening new foreign markets. And the farmers, all the ones I talked to, with few exceptions, said, we get it, we understand what he's doing, and we agree with that. But they told me by the end of 18, he's got to have this all worked out or we're going to be sunk financially. Well, more than a year later, you saw polls in late 19 where they were all still with him and even stronger than in 18, which was surprising, but I think good because they continue to recognize what he's trying to accomplish.
What other issues does the farming community in Minnesota's 7th congressional district care about, Dave? What is it that strikes at the heart? What do they think about at the ground level on a daily basis that politics and our national politics can impact?
Well, it's all about new markets. So while we're continuing to apply pressure on China, we've got to continue to open new markets, and we've had success. The Trump administration and Ambassador Lighthizer have had success with Japan recently, with the European Union. This USMCA, especially with the dairy reforms in Canada, are beneficial, and of course the USMCA is beneficial to the broader economy, not just agriculture. But those sorts of things, plus it's not a federal issue, it's a state issue, but I still have lots of farmers out in western Minnesota complaining about the buffer strip issue, which was done in St. Paul. So there's that, there's the general issue of red tape, the EPA still running amok despite the fact that the Waters of the United States rule has been stopped. But there's still a lot to be done in Washington, and it mostly involves getting them out of the way of the farmers.
Now, geographically, Congressional District 7, and I encourage everybody in our viewing audience to actually look at a map and see how vast and large physically this district is. It seems to me that it basically stretches from Canada down to, again, that little sliver of CD1. Dave, how do you represent a district with so many kind of diverse people across? It's not the same people, right? I mean, from northern Minnesota to southern Minnesota, that is your district. How do you kind of balance representing people who might have such different needs and wants and things that they care about?
Well, you know, I've been traveling all over the district for the last 4 years continuously and visited all 38 counties multiple times. And I haven't observed that great difference. I mean, obviously it's warmer down south than it is up north, and maybe they like hockey up north better than they do down south, but the issues are all the same. And you know, a couple of them that we haven't talked about yet, but the refugee resettlement issue is hugely important to Western Minnesotans. Immigration reform is hugely important, as is securing the southern border, and I find that to be the case throughout the entire district.
Let's talk about that, in particular, refugee resettlement. It seems to me now Minnesota, county after county, is taking up new votes because Donald Trump has left it up to the states and the counties to determine whether or not they want to take new refugees. On the ground, Dave, what are you hearing about that issue across the district?
Well, I'm hearing that residents of Western Minnesota are strongly in favor of reforming that program. And what I've been talking about for the last couple of years is the 1980 U.S. Refugee Act. I've been calling, a lot of candidates have been calling for a pause in that program or a delay of that program. I've been saying that we need to end the program. We need to repeal the act and do away with the program. And that may seem shocking to some folks, like, what, you don't feel bad for refugees? You don't have any compassion? And it's not that at all. It's that I am working with and talking with people right now who have experience, former refugees who have experience over in Eastern Africa with their own refugee resettlement programs. And what they tell me is what I had sort of figured out intuitively and through research, which is for far less money, you can help refugees under duress in other parts of the world by removing them from the duress, but keeping them in that same general area of the world. You can help them much more effectively for far less money, and you can avoid the two things that are on the hearts and minds of people in Western Minnesota. One is the strain on the social welfare benefit system, and number two, the national security risk of bringing people from those 7 countries that the Obama administration identified, which the Trump administration continues to clarify that you can't vet them. And those are the real concerns of people in my district as to why they want either dramatic reform or, in my case, I'm calling for a complete end to the program.
Is it a similar concern in Congressional District 7 about the southern border with illegal immigration? Or you obviously have some firsthand experience on the southern border. Give us your kind of take on what the district thinks about illegal immigration in particular, and then really, is it a similar concern to refugee resettlement? Are they concerned about the same things in terms of the welfare situation, or are there nuances to how they feel about illegal immigration from the southern border and refugee resettlement from across the ocean?
I think the concerns are similar, but they remind me and I remind them, and we mutually understand that they are different issues, though they're related for some of the same reasons I just talked about. But with immigration, what's always brought up to me by the voters is to make sure that I understand, and I think I do, that you have the issues of legal immigration and illegal immigration. They're very concerned about both, and with legal immigration, they always want me to understand that it's hugely important to agriculture and to manufacturing and to really quite a few industries in America that we have a better, more healthy, more robust seasonal worker program and things that don't currently exist. And so I've always said, look, I'm hugely in favor of legal immigration and meeting those needs, but on illegal immigration, I'm with President Trump. You know, he in 2017 he rolled out a 70-point plan for fixing immigration, both the illegal and the legal side of it. And the 70 points fell under about 3 or 4 different headings. ending the lottery system and chain migration, going to a merit-based system, securing that border. I'm all in favor of that 1,954 miles of border having a continuous fence. Collin Peterson, for instance, is not in favor of that, and so many politicians are not
he
in
said
favor.
he said he thinks it would be a waste of money. He's on record in saying that.
And he's also on record at a parade that one of our county leaders witnessed him saying that it doesn't matter if we ever secure the southern border. He said the cartels will fly all those people up to Canada and get them in through the northern border. So I think I'm much stronger than Collin on all of that.
Let's talk about the nuance of the issue of impeachment. Now, impeachment has been this hot button issue. Democrats seem to be using it as a battering ram for the most part. Republicans as well. Very divisive. You can tell they're playing to their base, both sides of the issue. Collin Peterson was one of the guys who came out and voted against impeachment. How do you play off of that, understanding that this could be a really good issue for Republicans, but the guy you're running against seemed to vote how a Republican would vote on it?
Well, the way I play off of it is just that, look, he had to say that because if he had announced publicly that he was supporting impeachment, that would have been his retirement announcement. And everybody knows that. They see through that. So whether that's his position legitimately or not really doesn't matter. The problem in that case is his caucus and the party that he belongs to, and people know that. Yeah,
and the candidates, obviously, he is supported financially or otherwise, as you mentioned before.
Right.
He is part of the Democrat caucus. I don't think for any of us we should forget that. And speaking of that, the life issue, Dave, big issue in CD7. All the polling tells you that in many cases you had precincts, counties, caucuses flip in the past 12, 14 years from deep, deep blue in CD7 to just blood red, some of the most conservative counties in the country because of the life issue. And what I want to ask you is, how do you, as a congressman, once elected, make an impact on that issue? Understanding in 2016 we had both chambers and we had a president, and it doesn't seem like much meaningful reform had happened for pro-life issues. I mean, we're still funding Planned Parenthood to a certain extent. How do you as one congressman make a difference on an issue like that?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways. One is using the bully pulpit in shows like this to highlight what's really going on in Congress. I was very bothered by that $1.3 trillion omnibus bill that the president signed, reluctantly signed, in early 2018. And you remember that the headlines after that blared, "Republicans fund Planned Parenthood for the rest of the year." And it bothered me a lot, and it bothered a lot of voters. And I scratched my head and thought about it for a few months. And finally, it occurred to me that I didn't have a clue what that meant. How did the Republicans fund Planned Parenthood?
Yeah.
Was there a line item in the budget? And so I ended up calling the House, it was either the Budget Committee or the Appropriations Committee, and I was handed it around to a couple of folks, but it finally ended up talking to a woman there who was very pro-life and very conservative, and she graciously spent about 20 minutes explaining to me what had happened in 2018. The bottom line is the U.S. House was still under Republican control in 18, and the final language in the little omnibus, the mini omnibus that they do with health, labor, and education, had language that affirmatively disallowed reimbursement to Planned Parenthood, even for non-abortion services under Medicaid and Medicare. So that was right there. It was in the language. And I said, well, what happened in the Senate? What happened in the Senate under Mitch McConnell is that they had those same three, education, labor, and health and human services, but they paired it up with the defense bill. And they affirmatively did not put that language in there. And so when they came together in committee, they resolved to strike that language out, and the president signed it, and that's how we ended up funding Planned Parenthood. I was very glad to learn what the truth is, but to answer your question, my plan is in Congress to highlight that and say, look, we have got to do better. If we are the party of life, we can't take language out or not put it in there, Senator McConnell, and we've got to do better. And I also want to work with the president. He may or may not know the story I just told you. Right. I want him to know it. And I think if he has more people like me in Congress to push him along to do the right thing, that he has such a huge opportunity on this life issue.
Right.
To threaten to veto language that isn't in there, or to sit down with the leaders of the parties and go, look, you will add this stuff, or we're going to shut down the government.
It seems like there's another issue along a similar vein. Obviously, we're not talking about the mass slaughter of unborn children, but we are talking about the national debt, which I have seen on your social media page. It is a specific issue that you are immensely concerned about, Dave. One, it doesn't seem like we have leadership anymore who is driving that specific issue or who is a hawk on that specific issue. One, how do you think we got here? And then two, just give us your thoughts, generally speaking, on the national debt and what you hope to do about it.
Well, not since the late 90s with Newt Gingrich, I think, have we really had leadership in Congress that prioritized balancing the budget, getting rid of the deficits, and trying to do something about the size of government. And so as a result, we've run throughout the last year since then, deficits anywhere from $300 billion all the way up to 1.3, 1.4 trillion. I mean, every single year of the first term of Obama was over $1 trillion, and I don't know about you, but I had this dread in my stomach the whole time. First time I saw that it was going over $1 trillion.
It's still there. I mean,
I know.
It's still there.
I know. And so the bottom line is I am running to put an end to that. Can a freshman in Congress do a whole lot about it? I'm always told, Dave, you're naive or whatever, but it doesn't help to be silent about it. And so I think, first of all, the 1974 statute that governs how Congress is supposed to budget and appropriate, the problem with it is, and I've read the whole thing, there's no teeth in it. I mean, it's the law, but if Congress doesn't abide the law, there's no penalty.
It's like a congressional rule of sorts.
Right, right.
There's nothing binding in any of this.
So by April 15th every year, both houses, the House and the Senate, are supposed to have a resolution so they can declare this is our budget for the year. And by June 15th, they're supposed to have all 12 bills done. They never do that. So that over the summer, they can negotiate in conference committee and sign the bill before the beginning of the fiscal year.
Something so wrong about the way that we do government. I mean, it seems to be that way at the state level, and it's, from the sounds of it, it seems to be that way at the federal level, where at the end of the day, you have 4 people get in a room and determine what's going to be in a budget, and then you as the caucus sign it. Do you think it'll be hard, Dave, if you're elected, to have kind of that moral courage to stand up against?
No, because there's some great examples. I mean, you had Senator Cruz, who I believe voted against this most recent omnibus, partly because it was this high, and he was given 18 hours to read it. He's like, I'm not voting for it. I didn't read it. Same with Thomas Massey of Kentucky.
By the way, in our budget, the age 21 tobacco was in a budget.
That was slipped in there. Yeah. But the reason I am so passionate on this subject, you brought this up a couple minutes ago, is because there's urgency here. This isn't just something about some species of plant somewhere. That we're talking about. Something I say a lot on the trail is this. Former Navy 4-star Admiral Mike Mullen, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff a few years ago, and more recently General Mattis, who was our Secretary of Defense, they both have publicly said more than once that the greatest challenge facing this nation, when you talk about the federal government of the United States, is not some threat from China, not some threat from Russia or Islamic terrorism. The greatest existential challenge to the United States of America is our crushing national debt and these annual deficits. And I believe it's true. We have a $23 trillion national debt right now, and that does not include $200+ trillion in unfunded liabilities that Dr. Lawrence Kotlikoff of Boston University and others have famously talked about. We have got to get this under control, and I understand the issue, and I've got specific ideas, and I'll be rolling out a plan in the weeks and months ahead from lots of smart folks out there that is what I think is the best way to do that.
Not asking you to give away the farm, no pun intended on that one, but with that specific issue, generally speaking, Dave, we can look at military spending. There's no doubt about that. We understand the amount of money that we spend there, but a lot of that, even a lot of our unfunded liabilities, come from Social Security, welfare, health care. What, generally speaking, do you cut? I mean, because that's the natural question we're always presented as Republicans, and the Democrats use it as political football. All right, Mr. Republican, if you're so smart, what do you cut? Because we're going to weaponize it against you. What do you cut?
Well, 2 areas. One, we spend about $4.3 trillion a year. About 30% of that, about a third of it, is the discretionary side, which is what we all argue about. Defense spending makes up about half of that 33%. So it ends up being about 16 or 17% of the total pie. Democrats will often talk about it being half of our spending, but it is half of the discretionary part.
Yes.
The thing that nobody wants to talk about is that 70% of our total federal spending every year and 90% of the projected growth in future spending is in the non-discretionary side, which is where you have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, WIC, federal disability insurance, federal unemployment insurance, and all those programs. And you have to do reforms there because the math doesn't work.
Right.
If you take a third of $4.3 trillion, that's about $1 trillion, which is the annual deficit. So if you want to zero spending in 1 year on education, agriculture, transportation, defense, you could spend no money on any of those things and you would just balance the budget. So you have to make spending cuts in those areas, and you have to make reforms that will lead to less spending in the non-discretionary side. On the discretionary side, I have specific ideas. We have 15 U.S. departments. We have 220 plus agencies, commissions, bureaus, and so forth. We could eliminate 5 of those 15 right away. It only ends up being about $171 billion a year. But only
yeah.
Which is only 3.5% of the total $4.3 trillion bill. But that's a start. And the 5 that I would call for are education, energy, HUD, commerce, and labor. You could do away with all 5 and give those functions back to the states. The easy one is education, because they only do 2 things. They generate voluntary national academic performance standards that we don't need.
Right.
Thank you for producing those. I know how to...
Hasn't helped anybody,
right,
by the way.
And then the other thing they do is they hand our own money back to us with abusive strings attached.
Right.
I don't think that's a good bargain for the $80 billion a year that the Department of Education spends.
That's right.
So just abolish the department, send the money back home, and same with the other 4 that I mentioned.
Dave, with the last kind of couple minutes that we have in today's program, just who is Dave Hughes? What do you want people to know about you, your campaign, why you're running, and why this matters to you in CD7?
Well, I'm Dave Hughes, Major, U.S. Air Force, retired. I'm a husband of coming up on 18 years. I have 7 young children, one of which we adopted from China. We homeschool our children. Ours is a Christian home. After serving on active duty and for almost 22 years and deploying to the combat zone 7 times, I've been retired for 5 years now. And since retiring, I have worked as a contractor to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, teaching their federal agents how to fly the MQ-9 drone. I think I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about it. It was the same drone that struck Soleimani recently. And so I've been teaching those agents how to fly that. And I end up flying more than they do because they're off doing ancillary duties. But they and we guard our northern and southern borders. And so I see firsthand every day the illegal crossings on the southern border and the fact that we are inadequately resourced on that southern border. A lot of career politicians talk about, we can't build that wall and all we need is sensors and so on and so forth, but that's because they haven't looked into the issue. I am running to preserve the American dream. I think that our fiscal irresponsibility is putting that at risk. I am very confident in President Trump and what he wants to accomplish with the America First agenda. So I'm running to partner with him. I think he needs more partners in Congress. And unfortunately, he has too many people in Congress who've been there for too long that really have their own agendas and are not partnering with him. And I know he wants to do the right thing. He just needs more people in Congress to help him with that. And that's why I'm running. Dave,
for our viewing audience, how can they learn more about your candidacy and help you out?
Well, I have a website. It's hughesforcongress.us. That's HUGHESFOR Congress.us. We're on Facebook and Twitter. My personal cell numbers, I think, are on all those. So I love to hear from folks. I'm very accessible. One of the things that we haven't talked about is that, like Senator Grassley down in Iowa, who's been doing a town hall in each of the 99 counties of Iowa for all the years he's been in the Senate, it's my intention to do the same thing.
Very good. Dave Hughes, thank you for joining the Republican Roundtable.
Thanks so much, Max.
This has been the Republican Roundtable. I'm your host, Max Rymer. Until next time.